All right, what's up, guys? So the big question of the day now is what can we do about injuries? If you've been watching the Augsburg save, and if you haven't, it's all right. If you've been watching it, you know that we've really been bitten by the injury bug, and it's starting to drive me nuts because we have good players who are not playing. We have to play a bunch of players who are not so good because all of the good players are injured. So I took a little stroll over to Google, and I went around and searched and tried to find what people are doing to help out their injuries. So we'll go look into a couple of things that people do, some things that I think are effective and some things that maybe are not that important or that effective. Very first thing you actually want to look at is your training schedule. So I'm still using the evidence-based football manager schedule. When we look at it, let's go ahead. We'll just load it like this. There we go. You can see that there are some periods of rest built in. 1, 2, 3. We need to have attacking, and we need to have defending and physical to help the players actually train into something useful. And then ground defense, of course, is what he found was sort of the wild card that also helps, right? Match practice helps a lot as well. And if you think that match practice makes your players too tired to play the game the next day, you haven't tried it yet. You should give it a try. You'll find that your players are actually not tired at all. Sports Interactive is not being truthful with you when they claim that match practice makes your players too tired. So throw that idea out the window. This is kind of the right way to do it. So that's number one. We're doing all right. Number two is to look through your squad, of course, and make sure you don't have any guys who are heavily injury prone. We've looked through every player on the roster, and we don't see that anywhere. I'm not going to go through every single player here to necessarily prove this to you, but as I assign players, I look for players who are not injury prone. That's one of those things that is really important. I read a rumor somewhere that injury proneness doesn't mean how often they're injured, but rather how serious it is. I'm not certain that I believe that. I've not seen a lot of evidence for that. Alejandro Garnacho is a player that we purchased from, I think it was Manchester United. And he's had a twisted ankle twice and has missed 7 weeks of the season, hasn't played a full match yet. When we go look at his coach report, there's nothing here about injury proneness. I'm not really worried about that. It's not a big deal, right? The other thing you can look at with your squad, of course, is something I don't have here, which is your squad's, let's see here. It's going to be under attributes. It's your squad's natural fitness. There we go. Because better natural fitness means that the guy's more likely to be ready for the match on match day and that he's going to be more healthy. We do have some players with good natural fitness. And look at this. The guys who tend to be fast, for the most part, tend to have good natural fitness, but not always. Garnacho, not necessarily. Broya, also not necessarily. And he's almost always ready for each match. And so we could look through that and say, well, maybe there's some improvements we could make. Maybe we need better natural fitness here. There are ways, and we'll go into this later, but there are ways through training that you can also increase your natural fitness if you want. These guys who are down here actually don't play that often, in part because they are never fit, right? So that's part of the problem. I don't think, though, that this is caused necessarily by a lack of natural fitness. I mean, Furahad looks pretty healthy. He's 19 years old, and yet he was injured with a pretty significant injury and has ended up missing quite a few matches, which has been a real killer to us. So that's another thing that we've looked at, and it's not really helping us with the answer. Now, there's another tip that I found. I actually, fortunately, found this at the very beginning of the save. I had never done this before, but I would definitely recommend giving it a look. If you go over to your training tab and you go over to rest, one thing you can do is you can turn off pitch or gym work for everything that is under full health, excellent health, right? And this seems to work fairly well in terms of getting players enough rest. What happens when you do this is every time a guy's not full at rest, for example, Garnacho, he is given a day of rest, right? And that's kind of what you want to do. That way you have guys who are resting. It makes it a lot easier when you're choosing your side because then you don't have to worry so much about accidentally choosing a guy who's not fit because the little yellow or orange thing pops up and it's like, oh yeah, no, he's okay. Now you can turn this on to double intensity. I'm not certain that I fully understand what impact that has. People have recommended that in the past, and clearly my physio is recommending it here. Maybe we want to try it. Maybe we don't want to try it. I don't know. Basically, though, I wouldn't worry as much about double intensity as I would about making sure that this stuff is set on not necessarily super intense, right? The way that this is with our team and with this intensity of the tactic we're using, we probably don't need extra intensity when we do training in the gym. So, next thing we look at is the tactic. And when we look at our tactic, we've downloaded, of course, this tactic from FM Arena, giving it a try. It's going to be very heavily intense. It requires a lot of intensity because, of course, it is a tactic that involves a lot of running at the defense, a lot of countering, gegenpress, and so on and so forth, right? Just like most other tactics in Football Manager that work, right? That's sort of the way that this is. And so our tactic is going to make the players tired. We try to counter that by assigning a lot of younger players that can help us with some of these long-term injuries, right? It hasn't helped us with every single thing. We have obviously still have a problem with injuries, but it helps out in a pinch. That's another thing that we can do to try to improve things. And then there are a couple other things you can do when all else is lost. So you can go over here to Club Vision. You can go ahead, take a look at your facilities. What you want to make sure is that you have the highest possible training facilities. Ours are excellent, and I suppose that means that we could get better ones if we really wanted. We probably should be updating the junior coaching and youth recruitment as well, which is probably something I'll do right after this video is done, right? You want to make sure, though, especially that your training facilities are up as high as possible to try to avoid having injuries and other crazy things happen. And then finally, last but not least, is kind of what I've been doing recently, which is making sure that we have better staff. This is something I neglected to do at the beginning of the save because it's a real pain in the neck, especially when you have so many staff positions. So you can see we've had some staff positions taken away from us because I think the board's upset about that I'm spending money we don't actually have. Our coaching staff isn't great. We need to improve it. At some point in time, we will. We're not going to do it right now. What I was worried about, though, was this medical staff. And so we'll look over here at the medical team, and you can see some of the reasons why I was worried about it before. We brought in 3 new physios to make sure that we have all 20s on physio. Now, this physiotherapy, interestingly enough, is one of these fields where, there's so many guys who have a perfect 20 for physiotherapy that you can choose basically whoever you want. In theory, there are other factors you're supposed to look at when it comes to physiotherapy. In my experience, though, none of the other factors are really worth looking at. It really is just physiotherapy as high as you can possibly get it. The next thing is sports scientists. You can't find as many who have a 20 for sports science, but you'll find 20s and 19s, which is exactly what we have. Oh, look at this. We have a head physio who has a 17, so we can get rid of him and sign another one of these guys who has a 20 for physiotherapy because we might as well. Another thing that people say you can look at if you want is over the coaching team and pay attention to your fitness coaches and basically how well they're doing. I don't want to make a whole ton of changes. And when I look here, neither of these fitness coaches have particularly good fitness ratings, so that may be part of the problem. If you really want to get rid of somebody, even if you're this far into the save, you can right-click on them and just ask them to, let's go back to where we were. You can right-click on them and ask them to agree to mutual termination. So contract, mutual termination. And guess what? They will agree to contract mutual termination. That's kind of what happens even at this point in time of the save. You don't have to do that right away. And then you can go out and say, okay, well, I want to go find another staff member, do a staff search. I have it organized here by country mostly for scouting reasons. And we say, okay, Kim Jong-ho, okay, we want you. We're going to assign you. You're going to be our head, there it is, head physio. I always lock that there. We're going to assign you for a long time because I really don't like having to change things. There you go. And we're done. We're going to go do the same thing now with the fitness coaches and all of that. And basically, that's kind of what you can do to work on trying to avoid injuries. I mean, you go to the medical center and they'll tell you that, now we're at joint 6th in the injury table. We were at joint 2nd. It's heightened due to tactical intensity. We should look at adjusting our tactics to be less intensive. They're almost always going to say that because that's kind of what they say, right? The truth is that there's a lot more that goes into it than just that. Over time, if you really want to, you can look for players who have higher levels of natural fitness. For me, it's not really necessarily a make or break thing. I think that you're better off sort of fixing some of these other problems first before you go into that. And also know that natural fitness is not really going to give you an advantage in terms of like game by game play. It will give you an advantage instead in having guys who maybe are not injured quite as much. So you have to sort of keep that in mind. Right, you're probably better off looking for something like heading ability, or if it's a striker, maybe even something like finishing or something like that, instead of looking just directly at natural fitness and sacrificing everything else for it. So there you go. There's my advice on what to do about injuries. We'll see if things become a little bit easier here in this save from here on out. And I'm off to buy some new fitness coaches. We'll talk to you later. Bye.